What's happening, my people? Good evening, my people. Let me just give you guys a few minutes to come in. 11:02 GMT right now. Very late for me. Give you guys a couple of minutes to come in. Listening to probably the most appropriate song you can listen to by Fela Kuti. Teacher, don't teach me nonsense. In other words, if you're a student and you're being told a bunch of BS, you tell the teacher, don't teach me nonsense. That's exactly what the song is saying. Tito, my brother, welcome, welcome. Welcome to you. Starting in a second. Once again, listening to the sounds of Fela Anikulapo Kuti. Because what you see in the picture is showing you teachers teaching students nonsense. What you have there is the head of INEC, the electoral body, the people responsible for the elections that happened in Nigeria last week. As you can see, I have my green. But anyway, they are teaching us nonsense. So in the words of Fela, teacher, don't teach me nonsense. I'm not ready for your nonsense. Hey, Tito, my bad, sister. Sorry, Tito. Tito, my sister, my bad. I'm so sorry. People, get the likes up. Let's get started. Let's get started. Okay, let me fade out the music. Actually, no, let's hear the hook quickly. So again, for those of you just coming in, we're listening to Fela. So, in universities, they used to be like, these university lecturers are teaching people nonsense. This is back in Nigeria, back in the 80s, in 70s and 80s. And these teachers would do whatever they needed to do to get across the line, bribery, sleep with students, etc., just so they can get their extra money. And it's no different to the head of INEC, the electoral body responsible for the elections that we just had in Nigeria. He is also responsible for ensuring that the elections are free and fair. But of course, he made a public announcement a few days ago to say that some nonsense happened. But anyway, let's get started. Let's get started. And fade out the music. Okay. All right. Cool. Good evening, everybody. I hope everybody's doing well. It was my birthday last week. And I'm very, very grateful to the Almighty for giving me another year. What I wanted to talk about quickly today is an update on the elections. We finally have a winner. Nigerian elections, we finally have a winner. And I'd like to start by explaining to you what this image looks like. So this is the head of INEC, a few days ago, yesterday, I think it was. He was officially announcing the winner of the Nigerian elections. If you remember from last week, we were talking about the four, I wouldn't say major, but the four candidates who were likely to be elected as president, or at least who had an important part to play in terms of the Nigerian voter population. So long story short, the person that we expected, many people in Nigeria expected to win, is the person that actually won. But anyway, let's move on. So let's go through an overview of the 2020 general elections in Nigeria. So Nigeria operates a federation just like the United States of America, in the sense that, hang on, let me change this image around a little bit. Okay, people haven't even seen me today properly. Hang on. Okay, let's see. Is that how I do it? So the Nigeria operates a federation much like the United States of America, in the sense that you have a Senate, you have a House of Representatives, and then you have a presidential executive, right? Who's the president. We also, we have 36 states. I explained that to you guys last week as well, how the states were eventually created from three geopolitical regions back in the pre-1950s, pre-1960s, and then it gradually got smaller and smaller. They got smaller and smaller, and many, many more. Out of those 36 states, we have 774 local governments. Local governments is essentially a constituent, which each one has a House of Representative and a senator. Now, the elections that took place across those 774 local governments, and we had 176,974 polling units. In other words, you could go and vote in one of 176,974 places. Sounds pretty easy enough. There had been this drive over the last few months for people to go and get registered to vote, much like they do in different parts of the world. 87.2 million people registered and got their permanent voter card, PVC, right? Which is basically a form of ID which is scanned against the barcode. 87 million people. So that is approximately a little bit short of 1/3 of all of Nigeria went to vote, went to register to vote. Now the winner needed to have 50% of all the 50% of all the states plus one. In other words, have a majority, and then there was only one female candidate. He will become president of Nigeria. Now, because of all the shenanigans, you have the Peter Obi camp, who's basically a new, he's come from a new, what they call the third force. So he's not an obvious candidate in the sense that we were not expecting him to be up there, but he managed to make it there. Then you have PDP under the man called Atiku Abubakar, and then you have, what's his name? And then you have Bola Ahmed Tinubu of the APC. And then you also have another guy from the north, but we didn't really bring him up last week because I didn't really think he had a chance. Anyway, so that's what was supposed to happen in theory. Now, this part is very important. This part is from the Nigerian Electoral Act of 2022. So basically an amendment. Over the last few years, Nigeria has not moved on with the times. In other words, you go country with that many people, you would think that the fastest way to register all their votes is to do it electronically. Over the last few elections, that's not been the way. We've been literally doing it by hand, which obviously is the easiest way to cheat, because by the time you get to the, oh my God, I just realized my sound isn't good. My sound isn't even plugged in. Hang on. Please bear with me. Nobody even said anything. Bear with me 1 second. Okay, bear with me. I'll be right back. Let me give you guys some tunes while I'm doing this. Bear with me. Nobody even said anything to me that my audio wasn't on. All right, bear with me. Okay. Make sure this is all working. Bear with me, people. Okay, perfect. All right. How's my audio sounding now? Hope it's better. Hope it's much better. Okay. All right, Tito, thank you very much. Adult Talks, thank you very much. Mike wasn't, Mike has to be right. But anyway, back to my point. Let me fade the music out again. Okay, so like I was saying to you, and for those of you just coming in, we're playing Teacher Don't Teach Me Nonsense, okay? Because of the nonsense that we've just been hearing in the election. But anyway, so back to my point. So Section 60, so go back to what I was saying. So the Nigerian Electoral Act of 2022 was basically there to try and get rid of the problem that we had of this paper ballots. In other words, you put your fingerprint, you put it in a box, and then they take it somewhere, they count it, collate it, and then obviously that's easy for people to go and be corrupt. In other words, to stuff the ballot boxes. So they introduced this thing called the BVAS, which is basically like a machine, like some sort of iPad looking thing, which is designed to ensure that once your permanent voter's card is scanned, you make your vote and it's easily logged. Okay, so in other words, it cuts out all the extra drama. And I wanted to, and this was very important because I wanted to show you what the actual what the people had decided, what the government had decided should be the changes to this new system because of this new PVC or BVAS, excuse me. All right, cool. So Section 60 says, and I won't go through all of it because I don't want to waste your time, but we want to just focus on, this is basically outlining what the procedure should be at an election, at a polling unit. So it basically says, so Section 4, the presiding officer shall count and announce the result at the polling units. In other words, we finish voting, go and count in front of everybody. Section 5, subsection 5, the presiding officer shall transfer the results, including total number of accredited voters and the results of the ballot in a manner as prescribed by the commission. Sounds pretty easy enough. A presiding officer who willfully contravenes any provision of this section commits an offense and is liable on conviction to a fine of not more than 500,000 naira, which is around, at this point, I got about $1,000 now, nearly, yeah, maybe even, yeah, something like that, or imprisonment for a term of at least 6 months. This is what it says. This is how it explains what should happen. Now, the bits before subsection 1 to 3 basically saying votes should be counted at the place, etc., in the presence of everybody else. But is that what happened? And please, my people, if any of you in Nigeria, give me a shout, okay, and hit the like button, please. So on the day, what happened? So on the day, what we had, so top right corner, you have the BVAS, the BVAS, which is basically the iPad, which once you show up, you scan your, your permanent voter card, they're able to verify who you are, and then you can start voting. But what we have in the bottom picture is literally a paper ballot. So very quickly, they started announcing that, oh, we're having issues with the BVAS, so everybody has to vote manually. We'll still count it manually, and then we'll upload it. So this is what they were saying to people at some polling booths. And in a minute, I'll go through what happened at some other polling booths. But in theory, this is what was happening. Then you have the 3 ballot boxes. So you have the one for the presidential, which is the one in the center, the red one. And then the other 2 are for House of Representatives and then the Senate. Sounds pretty easy enough. But of course, things didn't go well. Now, before we do that, I just want to just give you the preamble again. So back to more legal stuff. Section 64 of the Nigerian Electoral Act says a collation officer, in other words, the person who is the representative for INEC, which is the Electoral Commission, a collation officer or returning officer at an election shall collate and announce the results of an election, subject to his or her verification and confirmation that the number of accredited voters stated on the collated results are correct and consistent. In other words, if there are 54 people that voted, when I tally everything up, there should be 54 votes on the system. Sounds pretty easy enough. B, the votes stated on the collated results are correct and consistent with the votes or results recorded and transmitted directly from polling units under Section 60. This cuts out all the extra drama. So basically, we take the votes, put them straight onto the system. It goes straight to a central database. And actually, in a few hours, everybody in the country should be able to access them. Sounds pretty easy enough. Subsection 5. Subject to subsection 1, a collation officer or returning officer shall use the number of accredited voters recorded and transmitted directly from polling units under Section 47, Part 2 of this action, and the votes or results recorded and transmitted directly from polling units under Section 60, Subsection 4 of this Act to collate and announce the result of an election. In other words, we have counted everything. Everybody sees me counting it. We have uploaded it onto, we verified it against all the paper or whatever we have. We upload it into the system. Subsection 6, the final one. where during collation of results there is a dispute regarding a collated result or the result of an election from any polling unit. In other words, if somebody says there are 56 people here, but 79 people have voted, which happens, the collation officer or returning officer shall use the following to determine the correctness. And I won't go into more detail than that. But basically, the idea is once we have finished voting, the next thing that we need to do is to ensure that all the votes are correct. Once the votes are correct, we count it in the presence of everybody. And this has been going on for those of you who are in Nigeria. This is what we do most polling units. But of course, almost immediately we started hearing about thugs coming, snatching the ballot boxes in some places, not everywhere. Thugs coming, snatching the ballot boxes. But the common thing that was going around was that the BVAS was not working, to the point where they were saying, oh, we haven't got internet for our BVAS. And many people have reported about this, that we don't have internet for our BVAS. We're not able to access the information. We're not able to access and verify people, to the extent where some people were reporting that they were having to go and pick up the and use their hotspots on their phone, the personal hotspot, to give these guys internet, and they still made excuses. Of course, there were other circumstances where the INEC officials, the Electoral Commission guys, who are not, high up in that sense, the lower end people who are actually taking the votes, couldn't even make it to their base or didn't show up. And I saw in many situations people having to go and pick them up. Very, very strange. Not strange. Actually, nothing should be strange for us in Nigeria. We expect this type of thing. Okay? So all of this was going on the day. Now, what really happened? And I want you guys to just look at that lady in the top right. Her picture has been going around, or her image has been going around since the weekend. She was at her local polling unit. Thugs came and they were beating people indiscriminately, including her. Okay? Thugs were shooting. And, you have to take some of these images with a pinch of salt. You don't know how true they are. My own assumption is that these people were real. At least some of them were real, because we know how elections go on in Nigeria. If you go on the internet, you go on Twitter, go on YouTube, you'll see videos of people shooting up in the sky, people shooting even towards crowds. Because what you have to understand with the way elections work in this part of the world, and Nigeria's history is very, very, Nigeria's history is very, 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 very dangerous when it comes to election. Remember from last week, I was explaining to you, we had our first republic, 1960 to 1966. Then it was destabilized because people weren't even happy with those leaders. The next republic we had was in 1979. 1979, and it ended in 1983 when the military dictatorship of Muhammadu Buhari took over. The next republic we were supposed to have was in 1993, where OnuoraAbuah won and the army canceled the election. Then an interim government was put in there, a man called Ernest Shonekan, just to keep people at bay, but he wasn't really a president, not really. And then the next time we had a proper so-called democracy in the terms of where the person who was elected went into power was 1999, and it was a former army general. It was a former army general who had been president of Nigeria in the 1970s. He stayed for 8 years. And for those of you who are around between the years of 1999 and 2007, you will know that time in Nigeria's history, you had people like you had people, prominent politicians, prominent activists, prominent people who were outspoken towards the government. These people were murdered between 1999 and 2007. Remember, once a general, always a general. He may have been retired, but he's still a general in his attitude. Now, he basically ushered in that PDP government. The PDP government was the ruling party of the time. And the person who he put in place immediately after, and keep in mind, that same president wanted to run for 3 terms, which is unconstitutional. He eventually wasn't allowed to. And then the person who took over after him a man called OnuoraAbuah, basically died in office. He was too sick. He was too sick. And his vice president eventually took over. Now, the next time we had elections where whoever wins becomes president, not in the sense that it was a sitting president, was in the year 2015, where you have Goodluck Jonathan, who is the PDP, and you have General Buhari, the man who was responsible for the coup that took out the Second Republic, or if you want to call it the Second Republic, in 1983. Also a general. So a general basically ushers in another general but now they've given up the army uniform and they're now wearing their traditional clothes in civilian clothes. So that all sets the tone for when we talk about elections in our country, because we're not talking about an election which is run by civil servants and career politicians. It's elections that are being run by generals. The kingmakers in Nigeria, the people who essentially you have to go to, at least up until now, to put your arm around, they have to put their arm around you and give you the blessing, give you the anointing to become president. These are people who are all former presidents. Buhari is obviously the sitting president. Obasanjo, the president who was there between 1999 and 2007, who was also military president back in the 70s. Peter Obi, the Igbo guy I explained to you guys last week, the Igbo candidate, he went to him and he blessed him. That's why Peter Obi was able to come out there as a third party. Okay, so we essentially have a two-party state, just like the States, just like the UK for the most part. But Labour Party, which is Peter Obi's party, was able to push through because they had the blessing of Obasanjo. Buhari is for the APC party, and Bola Tinubu was the APC candidate. So those two automatically have put themselves in a place where Buhari is essentially endorsing this guy. And we have this thing in Nigeria also where it's so tribal and religious based. In fact, I'd actually say more regional than anything. In other words, the presidency has to rotate between the North and the South. And remember, from last week, I explained to you just how widely diverse the South is. You have many nationalities in the South. But somehow they think, okay, North, South, North, South. Somehow Igbos are never included in the South anymore. And I explained that also last week. But Muhammadu Buhari, his candidate from the South was a man called Bola Ahmed Tinubu, former president of Lagos State, one of the four that I showed you yesterday. So Bola Tinubu was a former governor of Lagos State. He was a former governor of Lagos State. But he lost in Lagos State. So consider this. With all the electoral malpractices that occurred, he still lost in Lagos State. Peter Obi won. Now, Peter Obi won. Maybe it's dubious. Maybe Obasanjo's guys managed to make it happen. There's no way of knowing. But in the end, what happened? What proof do we have? Well, of the 82 million people, and I showed this to you in the previous slide. Let me just show you that number again. 87.2 million registered voters. How many votes were actually recorded? 29% of them. 29% of the 87.2 million people actually cast their vote. Now, we have seen numerous images of polling booths that were burned, thugs coming, grabbing the ballot boxes, throwing them away, shooting people, chasing people away. We've seen this happen. So that all plays a part, of course. But also the fact that APC, their stronghold is in Lagos State. The fact that Peter Obi was able to win, it just shows you what the anointing of these former generals still has. Again, I'm not saying that's the reason why. He could have genuinely won with the votes because he definitely had the support of the people. But it shows you everything. Also, what worked in his favor is Lagos State, former capital of Nigeria, was also probably the biggest hub for Igbo people outside of outside of the eastern part where they're from. So INEC basically said, look, there was a glitch. We had a glitch. Now, you see, when you say you had a glitch, imagine going to the airport. Imagine you go to the airport. You're about to get on a plane. And you're about to get on your plane. You're going internationally. And then they say to you, oh, there's been a glitch on the system. So we're going to have to manually check everybody in. Now, the only way you can manually check everybody in is you still have to have access to the database, the server, that shows you who's supposed to fly. Because what stops me, I'm on my way to France. I go on a plane to Germany, and I say, "Oh, look at my passport. I have a passport." No, you still have to find a way to manually check people to verify they're supposed to be on the flight, on the manifest. Well, if we had a glitch, if you take that same scenario and put it into our election situation, if we had a glitch, if there was a problem with the BVAS system, and they were able to access everybody. Let's deal with that. They were able to access everybody and verify who everybody was. And then they were then able to say, okay, we have a glitch. You cannot actually vote here. And also we cannot upload it onto the system. Automatically alarm bells in your head should be ringing. You can access the person's information, but you cannot upload the votes. That's the first major problem. And of all the 774 local government areas, which one of them, that's the question I have, which one of them uploaded things in line with the Electoral Act of 2022, which I just read out, which is this one, section 64, subsections 4, 5, and 6. Which one of them? The answer is 0. Now, here's another funny thing. So if, and just so you know, if they haven't, by default, the election is null and void. And they have broken the law. And I explained to you, we read out what the fine was. 500,000 naira, the equivalent of about $1,000. That's the fine, or 6 months in jail. So by default, every INEC official that was at any polling booth that didn't follow the procedure should go to jail in a sane nation. But we are not dealing with a sane nation. We are dealing with Nigeria. Now, keep in mind, Nigeria is a major country, major player in the world. And so because it's a major player in the world was paying attention to this election. So what did they do? They sent foreign observers in order to monitor. Now, these foreign observers, I take them too with a pinch of salt because they have their agendas and so on. But they did have something to say, and this video is credited to somebody else. I just want to play their some highlights from their press conference. Just take a couple of minutes. Listen to what they said.
The mission noted that, despite the much-needed reforms from the Electoral Act of 2022, the elections still fell well short of Nigerians' legitimate and reasonable expectations. Voters' trust in the process has been shaken by INEC's lack of transparency. There were numerous missed opportunities to explain the cause and extent of Election Day challenges. The combined effect of these problems disenfranchised Nigerian voters in many parts of the country, although the scope and scale are currently unknown.
And while elections are a vital part of the process, it's the work that will happen next that truly determines the future success of this democracy. Nigeria holds the distinction of having one of the world's youngest populations. It has the largest democracy on the continent and one of the most populous democracies in the world. And so the credibility of the electoral process has a wide-ranging impact, not simply for the continent of Africa, but it has global meaning.
End of the election process, so we're not in a position, we don't want to interfere in any way in the political process. Our methodology is very clear in this regard. We make our observations, we answer questions in these settings, and we stand over the findings that we have were able to put in the public domain in this fashion. But we won't interfere in the process. It's a matter entirely for the Nigerian authorities to determine the way forward. If there are challenges that we identify, it is down to the Nigerian authorities to make their decision about how they wish to proceed with those matters. I want to thank you for your cooperation, for other civil society organisations that, as I mentioned in my opening remarks, provided us with a very warm welcome and with clear information which helped us to form the assessment that we're sharing with you today.
Just to summarize,
that expectation.
What you had. So a couple of people just came in. Lizzie, how you doing? Mr. Siad, how you doing? Now, what you had is observers from the U.S. You had a few more. You had from the U.S., you had the African Union, you had ECOWAS, which is the West African body that represents West Africa, the West African nations. You had representatives from there. You had African Union, you had U.S., you had the EU even. So these are people who were stationed pretty much. They couldn't go to every single polling booth, and certainly not every single local government, but they were able to analyze from the ones that they were able to go to that this election was not free and fair. Now, if they were establishing that this election was not free and fair, if the BVAS, and they mentioned it there, the BVAS and the amendments to the Electoral Act 2022, which we just read out again, if they were not able to comply with their own those new policies, by default, this election is a sham. It's a failure. It should not even be. We should not be talking about it. But of course, it's from a political standpoint, they can't seem to be involved. They can just make their assessments. Now, we deal with a couple of things that you guys said. So, okay, so very good question, Lizzie. She says, let me put the question up quickly. Lizzie asked the question, said, good evening, just joining. Weren't they able to upload the results for National Assembly candidates, but not presidential? That's a very good point. Now, the reason why this is a very good point is this. They said there was a glitch. Now, if they said there was a glitch, it means that remember, at the very top of the show, I explained to you, we had Senate, we had House of Representatives, and we had presidential, right? Those three elections were also happening at the same time. Now, in terms of the presidential candidate, presidency, there is only one constituency. In other words, you're voting for one individual. For the Senate, you have something like 469 constituencies. 469 multiplied by, I think, about 18 positions. So you have far more than the presidency. Yet there was no issue with those ones. But when it came to the presidency, there's a glitch. We cannot vote. So on balance of probabilities, and by the way, even if there's a glitch, even if you want to use that as an excuse, which it isn't, there is not one polling unit in all of Nigeria that uploaded the results the right way. So even before we go back, even before we deal with that question in the way that it should be dealt with, there is no way that we can properly analyze these elections as being free and fair. Now, let me just quickly move on, and then I'll come back to your questions. Where am I? Okay, so now let's meet our president. And our president has a very interesting story. Oops. Now, if you remember last week, I mentioned to you a couple of different things about our president. Somebody said, why is Stacey Abrams there? She was sent as the envoy from the U.S. to observe. She's been doing a lot of things with ECOWAS and with Nigeria in particular lately. But anyway, our president, the man who is now president-elect, of Nigeria, his background is simple. He claims he was born in 1952. We can deal with that. We all have our ages in Africa. You are whatever age you claim. But let's just say he's born in 1952, a 70-year-old man. By some standards, he's pretty young. Certainly by U.S. standards, he's a pretty young president. But we know that's not his age. But that's neither here nor there. Bola Ahmed Tinubu is known more importantly for being this. So I'll give you a bit history of him. He's a Muslim from the south. He's a Muslim from Yoruba land, the southwestern part of Nigeria. Bola Ahmed Tinubu went to study, like many Africans did, abroad. He went to the University of Chicago in the 1970s, I think the mid-70s. And he lived in Chicago for about, I think, approximately 10 years. Chicago, Illinois. Whilst he was there, he was involved with drug smuggling. This isn't my story. I made a documentary about a man called OnuoraAbuah. He used to run and still runs an operation called Sahara Reporters, which they call the WikiLeaks of Africa. They did a story on this years ago, so this is old news. But of course, because of the election, this story came out again. Rather than hear it from me, I just want to hear what this young reporter, had put out regarding the story of Bola Ahmed Tinubu. So this will just give you a brief history of what he did in Chicago, and then I'll tell you what he did when he got back.
For the benefit of those who have not necessarily seen this documentary or had the opportunity to read into some of those documents that you have put out on your social media, what's the centerpiece of this story, and why are you so interested in it?
So this is a story about a federal case which was investigated in the US in 1992 that had at its core a drug kingpin in a town in a city called Gary, Indiana, by the name of
Gary, Indiana, I believe is where Michael Jackson comes from.
When
right?
this fellow was taken down and given lifetime imprisonment, as part of the investigation, his heroin source was identified as a Nigerian drug dealer called Abiodun, who was working for another Nigerian drug dealer called Moise Adegboyega. And in the process of unraveling how they ran their business, transporting heroin from Nigeria to Chicago en route Indiana, how the money was moved, then a certain Bola Ahmed Tinubu was brought into the picture by the investigating agencies, which were the IRS and the FBI. Now, it was determined that Bola Tinubu's accounts, some of Bola Tinubu's accounts, were being used to essentially move money around on behalf of these drug dealers. And more than that, the actual address that was used to open at least one of these accounts was the same address that belonged to a house that was used by these drug dealers as the heroin pickup and drop-off point. And even more to the point that Bola Tinubu's wife, Oluremi Tinubu, actually at a point opened a joint account with Aubrey Akonde, who was the wife of one of these drug dealers. So it would appear that these people were sort of joined at the hip. Now, from the point of view of the investigating agent, Kevin Moss of the IRS, what was the real smoking gun at the time was the sheer quantum of money that was discovered in some of Bola Tinubu's accounts. Now, why the money was a red flag was that according to Tinubu's own submissions on a credit application, which he had filled in a few weeks before the investigation began, he declared his total monthly income as $2,400, and that he had no other source of income. So someone with an annual income of roughly $28,800 being discovered with about $1.4 million in his bank account that he couldn't explain, that for obvious reasons was a money laundering red flag in itself. And if you read the documents, the investigating agent stated that he had probable cause to believe that these funds were in fact the proceeds of, I quote, narcotics trafficking. Now, also in these documents, the agents reached out to Bola Tinubu, who was in Nigeria by this time, preparing to run for senator in Lagos West in 1992. When he reached out to Bola Tinubu over the telephone, Tinubu actually admitted that he was very familiar with Moise Adegboyega Akonde and with Abiodun Agbele, and that on several occasions, he had paid sums into his accounts that came from them. Only for him to make an about face a few days later and then claim to the same agent that he didn't know these people. So if you dig further into these documents, and I would sort of recommend that anyone who is watching this shouldn't necessarily just take my word for it or take what anybody else is saying about it. You should actually find those documents because they're in the public domain now. It takes a bit of time, but just sit down and read through those documents, because it's actually not that difficult to sort of establish a timeline of what happened. Now, this wasn't in the documents, but I was able to dig this out on my own in the process of researching the story. Just about 10 days after first contact was established between Kevin Moss and Bola Tinubu. But bear in mind that at this time, his accounts were getting frozen all over the place because the US authorities believed that
This is the man.
the money in
This is
those
30
accounts
years
was
ago, by the way.
proceeds of heroin trafficking. Bola Tinubu then proceeded to start spending hundreds of thousands of dollars on real estate, just days after he became aware that the US authorities had an investigatory interest in him, which obviously raises the question that, first of all, where did these funds come from? And more importantly, what was the purpose of parking this money in real estate? Was he trying to hide money from the feds after becoming aware that they were coming after him? These questions have never been asked before because some of these issues haven't even been made public before. I believe it was when I did the story in July that it emerged for the first time the sheer scale of real estate investment that he embarked on shortly after he became aware that the feds were coming after him.
The drug money.
Millions of dollars were spent buying real estate in the US and in the UK. And all this for someone who claimed that he had been cleaned out by the Abacha regime, that he had no money, that he was essentially poor and broke, and that he had made his, he claimed that he had made his initial big sum of money, the sum of $850,000 from a bonus payment while working as an accountant at the audit firm Deloitte & Touche, which for anyone who has any knowledge of how corporate consulting works or who has worked in the Big Four, you would know instantly that that categorically is not true.
So this is our president. And comments were coming through as that video was going on. But before I go through them, so essentially what we have, and this story is old. This isn't, I think it just resurfaced when he was running for president. So let me just establish the timeline. So this guy was obviously talking about he went to study in the 1970s, and these things happened throughout the 1980s. And then, of course, the IRS got involved in 1992. Coincidentally, in 1992, he returns to Nigeria finally and begins his political campaign, because in order for you to be a politician in most parts of the world, you need to have a certain amount of money. So he's able to fund his campaign. Initially joined, I think it was the Social Democratic Party or something like that. These are one of the parties that eventually folded and re-emerged as PDP and eventually APC. Now, he became a senator in Lagos State. So keep in mind, 1992, then 1993, we have the election with which OnuoraAbuah won, which was eventually annulled. We had that June 12th sort of rioting. OnuoraAbuah is put in jail, and General Abacha becomes president from 1993, military president from 1993 to 1998 until he dies. General Abdul Salam Abubakar, who was his chief of staff, I believe, army chief of staff, becomes president on an interim basis for a few months. And in 1999, out of prison, General Olusegun Obasanjo comes out and runs for president, comes out of prison and runs for president and stays till 2007. So in 1999 is when we had the first set of gubernatorial elections post-dictatorship and senatorial elections and House of Representatives, etc. So Bola Ahmed Tinubu became governor of Lagos State at that point from 1999 to 2007. 1999. All right. Now, as governor of Lagos State, he obviously was able to, he obviously had that foundation of being a senator way back when in 1992. So there was a certain aspect of him being able to familiarize himself with the place. Now, since he came out of being a governor, we're talking about a period of over 15 years. He has still remained prominent in Lagos politics. They call him the Jagaban. That's his nickname, Jagaban. He has a house. For any of you who've been to Lagos, you go to a place called Ikoyi or Onikoyi, which is on the island, which is probably one of the wealthiest parts of the whole city. He has a very big house, and I think I mentioned this to you last week. He has a very big house, numerous armed servicemen and so on protecting him till today. A governor, former governor and minor senator, if you want to call him that. But this story has to do with our current president now. Now we're talking about our president-elect. You see, there are certain things that you can hide, there are certain things that you don't hide. It just goes to show you what we in Nigeria will tolerate. Here we had the two main rivals, the two main political parties, PDP and APC. Atiku Abubakar had a money laundering slash what's the case again that he had in DC, in DMV area of the United States. This one had a story, a similar thing, but to do with drugs going on in Chicago. Those were the two front runners of our election. Those two, and the one that emerged was the drug dealer. Let's just be clear. We have a person who, if he didn't have Nigeria to run home to, would have most likely been convicted of something in the United States. God knows what senators and House of Representatives and congressmen that he paid in the United States and settled this situation with. God knows, because we don't know, because all we know is he left the United States, came back to Nigeria and became a politician and was an elected official. So there's a certain aspect of diplomatic immunity. I don't know if it applies in this case, but for the most part, this man walked away from something which, if he was an American citizen, would most likely be extradited, brought back to the United States, and probably jailed or fined or something. But now in 2023, at the age of 70, he is our president-elect in one of the most shambolic elections we've seen. And it's not to say the elections that we've had previously were good. They weren't good. They've all had low voter turnout. In 2015, when it was between Buhari and Goodluck Jonathan, the two people that we had, I think had a combined amount of votes of 30 million, I think, between the two of them. 30 million people in a nation of 200 million. But this one in particular, 87 million PVCs registered. Now, we know that some of those 87, and there's many stories about this, so please don't take my word for this. The PVCs, we've heard of 4-year-old children. I don't know if you saw it, the 4-year-old child with a PVC, a 4-year-old. You heard of people in the northern city of Kano who had come in from Chad. We hear about these things happening all the time. They come in for election during election period. They come in from Chad and Niger and neighboring countries and go and vote for people. So there's a lot of silliness going on as far as our electoral situation is concerned. Now, let me get to some of your points. I think people made a lot of good points today. I didn't want to miss anything out. So, okay. So, Lizzie says, the world needs Nigerian oil, so they're not going to get involved, in my opinion. I mean, please make no mistake. The US, the world, I mean, Nigeria's oil is one thing. But I think also the influence that Nigeria has on the region, in order, you see, Nigeria is in a very good position that if they were a serious nation, oh my God, they will be dictating what's happening around the world. They would absolutely be dictating what's happening around the world. Just look at the influence that we have outside of in spite of the problems that we have. But because we have the oil is just one additional thing that people say, you know what, let's just leave them alone. Okay, evening chat. Okay, another point. And honestly, I don't want them involved because it comes with strings attached. Exactly. This has to be resolved in Nigeria by Nigerians. Very good. Cat 106. Of course, there was malpractice in the election, but I think violence is not an option. Cat 106. Let me. This. I agree with you. You see, violence is. They say riots, if you will, are the language of the oppressed, people who are unlistened to. But there's also a phrase which is, if we're going to operate a democracy, and I heard this by the lawyer and former Nollywood actor Kenneth Okonkwo today. He said that in a democracy, and you know, in Africa, I'm not so much a lover of democracy, but in a democracy, it is not the outcome of the result that matters. In other words, whoever wins, it's not about who wins. It's about the process being followed. That is the most important part. You see, you guys, people, those of you in the States, 2016, you had an election. Whether or not it was followed, at least by your standards, to an extent, it was followed. The procedure was followed. People voted. Your votes were counted, and as close as it was, Donald Trump was elected president. Whether you like it or not, you took it for 4 years. We just made sure that come 2020, what year was it? Yeah, 2020. You made sure you mobilized people to get out and vote, and you voted him out. Problem with us in Nigeria, the system failed. The process did not work. And if the process did not work, by definition, we had no election. So forget about who won. Maybe Bola Ahmed Tinubu would have won anyway. But based off what we've seen, in any other world, in any other sane democracy, this wouldn't stand. But violence is not the answer. Of course, in theory. But what do you do to a people who are constantly pushed to the edge, pushed to the edge, pushed to the edge? Only God knows what a Bola Ahmed Tinubu presidency is going to look like. And maybe we'll talk about that in a minute. But these are things that we have to really start to say, okay, the right way, doing things the right way is not giving us the results we want. Okay, violence will only make it worse. Better accept and learn from the lesson. And that's what Nigerians will do. You see, Nigerians will ultimately just keep it moving. But part of what will happen is we might see another brain drain. As soon as an opportunity comes up, people will migrate out of the country. And then who are we left with? We're left with the criminals like Bola Ahmed Tinubu. We're left with the people that are willing to do all his dirty work. Okay? Okay. I blame PDP. If they had believed in Peter Obi as a vital candidate and backed him properly, this could have been a landslide for them and rejuvenate the party. So, very good point. Peter Obi ran as the vice presidential candidate under Atiku Abubakar. So remember, I mentioned the candidates last week. PDP's candidate, the former ruling party, main opposition, if you want to call them that, is a man called Atiku Abubakar. But he also ran in 2018, and Peter Obi, the Labour Party leader, this Igbo man that I've explained to you, is the third party force, was his vice president. He left the PDP because he said that he wasn't happy with the way they or all the other parties were misbehaving. And in all honesty, PDP, APC, they were between 2013 and 2017, they were all going back and forth. All of them were going back and forth. They were going between each party. They wake up in the morning, they're PDP. By nighttime, they're APC. Following day, PDP again. So, these are not political parties that have clear ideologies. We're not talking about far left, far right, center. We're not talking about deep ideologies. These are just ideologies based on how to steal. In other words, if I steal with you, will you give me more than if I steal with him? So keep that in mind. It's not like these are ideological parties. People's Democratic Party or Progressives Congress or whatever it's called. These are not, there's nothing deep about their meanings. Nothing. So let's just dead that. So, but I believe, as you said, had they backed him, maybe they would have had a different thing. But I think that was part of the problem. They didn't back him. Okay. Thank you very much for the super sticker. And then this is in regards to the story. I believe Just Lover ran the same story some months back. Yeah, this is the story about Bola Ahmed Tinubu being the drug, what do you want to call it? The money handler for the for the drug cartels in Chicago. Anyway, so in a nutshell, that is the story. So what I want to just quickly do before we wrap up, and please keep the comments coming, is just talk a little bit about what a presidency under Bola Ahmed Tinubu will look like. So we've got him for 4 years. And I think in May the 29th, I think is the date, Democracy Day, the anniversary of MK Abiola, he's going to assume office and become the president of Nigeria. Since 1999, we have had seamless transfer of power. So there obviously won't be any problem. Buhari has done 2 terms, so he's gone. So Bola Ahmed Tinubu is coming in and we'll see what happens. Now the question is, and I must be very like what's the word I'm looking for? I need to be very clear. I need to not be very biased here. Okay, never mind what he's done in the past. Let's just actually no. Let's look at what he's done positively. Now, for those of you who lived in Lagos circa 1999 to 2003, as governor of Lagos, he was able to do a lot. No, let me not say that. Obviously, we were coming out of a military dictatorship. Why does my hat look so crooked now? We were just coming out of a military dictatorship. And what he brought to Lagos was things like him and the man who succeeded him, a man called Fashola, Baba Raji Fashola. They were able to both bring Lagos to a place where Lagos was able to compete with other major cities across Africa. I won't say around the world. It's in a way you could actually give them the credit for facilitating Lagos as being the hub that it is now. You see, again, we talk about this. Many people go to Accra now around Christmas time, but many Nigerians in the diaspora go back to Lagos. Lagos has been built, and what they did basically was they kicked out the poor, or they didn't take care of the poor, and they developed the so-called wealthy areas. I'm not saying that Lagos is a beautiful place or everywhere is amazing. I'm just saying that what they were able to do was try and build an infrastructure around the wealthy people of Lagos in order to create, to maintain the wealth. And Lagos is a wealthy city. And I don't know if you know, Nigeria's federation, the way it operates is, it's not a true federation in the sense that you have state police or every state is self-sufficient to an extent. You see, like in America, probably the best example of a federation, every state has the right to secede if they want. They have their own state police. They have their own governor. They can even have their own laws. In Nigeria, we don't have that. We essentially, at the end of every month, every state will go to federal capital and basically say, this is what we need to pay bills, etc., etc. And this is why Peter Obi was so lauded, because when he was governor of Anambra State, he was able to manage things within his state. And Lagos is probably the only state that can do that because it's got so much wealth. They tax people for everything in Lagos. Whereas the other states have not learned to be self-reliant. At least their governors have not learned to be self-reliant. So that's created problems. So based on that, I would say Bola Ahmed Tinubu has an opportunity to do something. Certainly because I think the backlash of this election is going to put pressure on him to do better. But of course, these men never get into power to do well, you know. And a friend of mine said, I asked him, I said, who is the worst president in Nigeria's history? He said, and what he says is, the worst president is always the one that's coming. So if we thought, for those of you 8 years ago who saw Buhari coming in and remembering his record as when he was a military dictator trying to, you know, bring back people who were corrupt, you know, the Diko affair, bringing this man Umaru Diko back to serve trial after stealing $100 million. People thought that's what he would do exactly. And some people ran away when he became president. But what's happened since? I mean, Nigeria has decayed to an all new low. When Goodluck Jonathan, the first so-called Igbo man, if you want to call him that, he's half Igbo, to become president before Buhari, when he became president, everybody thought this was going to be amazing. But the corruption level went from here to there. You had situations like a minister, I think it was a transport minister or aviation minister, bought like cars worth millions with bulletproof for herself. She had to step down. There was a lady called Desiani Alison Madueke who was head of the petroleum sector, stole millions. You even had the woman that's at the World Bank, Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala. And a lot of people, like a lot of women especially, are so like, oh, they always boast about this. Oh my God, look at the great things she's done. This woman as, Minister of Finance, I think she was, of Nigeria, did not do a great job. I'm sorry. There was a time where I think the central bank governor reported that there's 20 billion missing. Reported it. There's 20 billion missing, unaccounted for. This woman who's at the World Bank, they're hyping up. went and said he didn't. I paraphrase. I mean, this is 10 years ago. I paraphrase though. Something to the tune of, it's like he didn't calculate properly. Can you imagine? He didn't calculate properly. And that man eventually had to step down. I think he was detained temporarily, had to step down. He eventually became the emir of Kano in the north. In fact, I did a documentary on Kano and I went to see him, by the way. But anyway, long story short, every subsequent government ends up being worse than the previous one. So what do we have to look forward to with Bola Ahmed Tinubu? We can hope. But hope, of course, is just that. The reality, the evidence of our previous presidents points to the fact that we will expect nothing less than more of the same. So, Nigerians, I implore you, those at home and abroad, if things are not working for you, find a way to make them work. We've seen 2 examples over the last decade. The first one we saw was when they removed the fuel subsidy. The fuel subsidy was designed to make petroleum cheap for people to buy, fuel for people to buy cheap. And there was an Occupy Wall Street movement going on in America. And we had an Occupy Nigeria movement where people protested, did whatever they could. People risked their lives to stop. The second time we saw it was EndSARS. EndSARS is the closest we've ever got to the much needed revolution we've needed in Nigeria. And I believe, and I said this last week, under Bola Ahmed Tinubu, if things, maybe we might not even get to the end of his term, but I believe something will spark the people to go and do something, because Nigerians can't take any more of it. So that said, I want to thank everybody for tuning in this evening. I know it's quite late. I don't know where people are. Lizzie, yes, they are still confiscating assets from them. Yeah, from them as in, remind me who we're talking about. Yes, the people that stole under the Good Luck Jonathan. In fact, one of that Desiani, the lady who was the head of the petroleum sector, she went and bought nationality in somewhere like some Caribbean. Is this some Caribbean or South American? Some island off the Caribbean, I think. Excuse me. But anyway, I just wanted to thank everybody for tuning in. Shout out to everybody. Thank you for the super sticker. My people, I appreciate this. I'm going to try and be back in a few days. Some people left ones last week saying that they want me to do a discussion on Congo. I want to do that. I actually want to talk about something a little bit different going forward. More personal stuff. I think something to do with the way just societies in general have been going. So anyway, let me think about it. Please, I appreciate all the comments. I would love for you guys to engage with me a bit more. Follow us on Instagram, AEA Films. On Instagram. Hang on, we have all this stuff somewhere, don't we? Did I put it? Follow us on Instagram. Make sure you subscribe to this YouTube channel if you haven't already, for those of you who are going to watch this afterwards. CashApp, put it up there just in case if you want to support what we're doing. I'm in post-production on a documentary that's looking amazing. 4 hours of content. Hopefully we'll be able to put it on the channel. Beyond that, I'm going to try and be back on again either tomorrow or the next night. Please let me know any topics you guys want me to discuss. I appreciate you all for tuning in. Have a great evening and have a good day wherever you are. Take care, people.